It's a real privilege to be with you this morning. So I'm going to begin by showing a photograph that I think says 1,000 words about our society today. Now, it's not this photograph, but it is of this man, a great human being named Kev. We met on a bus in New Zealand in 2008. My dear friend Surly is here today. For those younger in the audience, that's not a selfie because they hadn't been invented in 2008. They weren't a thing. We stopped off at some mad farm with all sorts of eclectic activities. And Kev, being a walking comedy machine, has a go at clay pigeon shooting, but things don't go to plan, which are the last words you ever want to hear as untrained youths handled loaded shotguns. Because as Kev's staring at the camera comically, a brief second later, he accidentally pulls the trigger, unleashing fire and fury in the opposite direction to which he's looking. Now, if you've ever wondered what that does to a human being, you're about to find out. And I've been waiting 13 years to share this photo. This is the moment. Because Kev went from this, gunshot, to this. Blessings to Kev for letting me use a photo. That, to me, captures how our society's felt for the last few years. Perhaps even since the financial crisis. It's been kind of wild, right? We've gone from one existential crisis to another. Now, during this time, of course, we've made... I've got to move that photo, haven't I? I can't talk seriously. During that time, of course, humankind has made multiple advances in science and technology and medicine. But there's a darker side to what's happening in society. Modern society, as cross-cultural studies show us, is creating some of the highest rates we've ever seen in depression, in anxiety, in chronic loneliness, in ill health, in schizophrenia, most tragically in suicide, which is increasing at a terrifying rate. 1 man every 2 hours dies in the UK because of suicide, and we lost one of our dearest friends this year to such fate, a beautiful soul. The bizarre thing is that not one of us, perhaps some psychopaths, right, want it to be this way. Okay, if I say to you, do you want a society to feel different? I know there's a collective belief we want to do that, but we're kind of caught in this dogmatic malaise where we just can't seem to get out. So, what's going on here? How is it that we can build a world which has got more togetherness? Because there's such division. I live in one of the poorest towns in the United Kingdom, and it's been absolutely decimated. So this is going to be a talk about hope, about how we can weave a genuine togetherness back into the tapestry of this very frayed society of ours. And I'd like to begin for inspiration by taking a step back in time. This is my nan and granddad, Harry. I always get emotional when I see them. Harry and Doreen. This is around just the Second World War. My granddad fought in the Navy. Now, in 1948, the health of Britons was in a perilous state, like many other nations. The challenge was that healthcare was reserved for the financially wealthy. So if you weren't wealthy and you got sick, you just suffered. And of course, this was detrimental to our well-being, but also to our productivity. The response was the most radical form of social reform ever conceived in the United Kingdom, which was the creation of our beloved NHS, the National Health Service, which in just 6 months, it's like the original startup, provided free healthcare to every single person in the United Kingdom without question. Now, there's not much that seems to unite the United Kingdom at the moment. It's kind of ironic given our name, isn't it? It's it doesn't do what it says on the tin. The ununited kingdom. This is our beacon of hope. This is what we all treasure. Today, it serves 1 million people every 36 hours. Mind blowing. It was the right solution to the right problem at the right time. Without it, our society would absolutely crumble. And last 2 years, never more than ever, right, with COVID. Now, see, our challenges today might not be as pronounced as those that arose from the Second World War, but they are manifesting to be just as critical. Now, back then, the problem was our physical health, and the solution was the NHS. Today, our problem is the demise of community. What cross-cultural studies show us is that when we lose community, we lose our health. A society which has strong communities simply does not have the scale of the problems that we're facing today. It just doesn't. And speak to our grandparents, right, whose wisdom outweighs any pie chart for my mind. They will tell you community is not what it used to be. And interestingly, during the Second World War, the government feared, understandably, that suicide and depression was going to rocket. It actually went down. Fascinating, right? And why did it go down? It's because we had a common enemy. And what that did was, it brought us back together. We united. We knew the only way it was going to make it through is to use each other's gifts. because we're not all weak in the same spots. What saved us was community. Now, of course, the answer isn't, well, let's get back to war. Let's get an enemy again. We can be grateful we don't need another nation as an enemy, or at least we shouldn't. But today we seem to have made enemies of each other. We spend so much time lamenting and yelling and blaming others for our woes. But the truth is that no institution ever can or ever will fully sustain our health. In the United Kingdom, we have a government which spends over 200 billion on healthcare and social care. We have an economy worth £2 trillion. We have 168,000 charities. Now, if by this point this hasn't solved all of our health problems, then whatever is, we need to accept that the institutions never can nor ever will fully sustain us, because there will always be gaps. And what fills those gaps? It's us. It's you and me. It's community. Which is why I believe we need a solution today that was as radical as the NHS was back then. In 1948, we created the National Health Service, the NHS. In 2021, I believe we need to create the NCS, the National Community Service. It was going to be the perfect partner, the natural extension, the symbiotic sister of the NHS. Its role will be to rebuild community, to rebuild our health. And the cool part is, it's not going to take billions of pounds of taxpayers' money, because it's going to be built by us, working together. So what I'd like to do now is unpack how this is going to work, because my belief is, if we build this, it's going to be transformational for our society to take away all of that suffering we're seeing, or at least most of it, and it'll be transcendent for those who participate. And let's begin by looking at the trailblazers that have already done what we need to do. In 1912, this amazing woman was born in the United States, and she felt the full force of racism and discrimination. This is Dorothy Height. She believed we had a collective responsibility to bear the treasures of the earth, that we've got to find ways to move forward together, not move against each other. For more than 4 decades in her work, but even more than that, as a volunteer, she worked tenaciously to help shape the agenda which ended segregation, ended lynching, and enhanced the rights of women and persecuted minorities. What a woman. Charles Storer, in 1998, or Chaz as he's known to his friends, he sat home in the UK, in his own words, a comfortable life, and he witnessed the barbaric conditions of the Balkans War. He could not sit by as innocent people, especially children, were forced into such treachery. For 2 decades, with the team at Hope and Aid Direct and his wonderful wife Bev, they've been taking thousands of tons of humanitarian aid, but more importantly, kindness and compassion to people in their greatest moment of need. I've been very blessed to volunteer with them in Kosovo and on the refugee crisis in Greece, and they are a force for good to be reckoned with. What about Malala Yousafzai? When our hometown in Swat Valley was occupied by the Taliban, they dictated that girls will no longer get an education. Malala stood up and spoke up with immeasurable courage because she believed that education is not only a basic human right, it holds the key to our future. Now, I don't share these stories in veneration or devotion, to borrow Dorothy Height's words, because they wouldn't want that, and I would expect it. In fact, what they would say is they're people just like you and me. What stands them apart is they were tenaciously focused on a purpose they recognised to be a mighty one. They didn't waste time on trivial gossip or social media. They didn't blame others. They just got to it. They acted, they didn't talk, because they knew these problems were urgent. These problems in our society that I mentioned up front, they're urgent. Like, we can't talk about it anymore. I realise that's ironic because I'm giving a talk to you. Just ignore that part. And this brings us to the first step of how we build a national community service, which is for each of us to find our mighty purpose, to find a cause that we care so deeply about. What is that for you? It might be suicide prevention, child welfare, it might be the environment. Imagine how different our society would feel if all of us showed up and we didn't talk about how busy we were, we didn't talk about how rubbish the government were. Instead, what we did, we said, what cause are you volunteering for? Oh, I'm volunteering for this cause, this is what I'm doing. Imagine how amazing that would feel. Now, the second thing we then need to do is the obvious thing, which is you find your cause that you care for, you then commit your time. Now, I think what I'm about to show you might be our greatest untapped potential to build a more beautiful, abundant world. If 50 million people in the United Kingdom, and that's feasible, by the way, gave just 2 hours a week for the cause that you care for, that's 100 million hours a week between us. And incidentally, 2 hours is about the amount of time we spend on social media each day. In a year, that's 5.2 billion hours. 5.2 billion. Okay, now let me just put this number in context. The NHS employs 1.3 million legends, as our dear friend Johnny would say. Between them, they contribute about 3.4 billion hours. So you can see just how significant this number is. And imagine the force we could create if we put these two things together. So, of course, though, we've got to make this time count. Right, so how do we do that? I mean, I was once part of a volunteering day with my work. You might have attended one of these days where colleagues come together quite awkwardly wearing matching fluorescent T-shirts and you do something like a dig up an allotment. Yeah, we've all been there, right? And I stood next to one of the greatest legal counsels, one of the finest brand directors, and one of the greatest sales minds in the whole country, and I might add best paid, painting a wall terribly. Like the worst paint you've ever seen. I wasn't sure if one of my colleagues was painting the wall or fighting it. And I thought, what a waste. You could be doing almost anything else right now with your gifts. And that's not to say that works beneath them. In fact, I encourage that we step into our communities and do technically menial things or so deemed. But I thought there's more that we can do to this. Your time is precious. So how do we use that time wisely? So we've been coordinating volunteers for over a decade. So this has got skin in the game research and empirical research. Its utility is for us to each pinpoint where can we make the biggest difference to the cause that we care for. So on the left, we look at the level of need. So there's things in society which at the bottom there are fundamental, like volunteering at a school fete or pick and litter. As we climb the Y to the sky axis, I can never remember the X and Y, it's the only way I can remember it, by the way. As we climb the Y to the sky axis, the need increases in criticalness. Is that a word? But eventually things become life and death. So think about response to a tsunami or COVID or indeed a civil war. On the bottom axis, we look at the length of impact. How long will what you do last for? So let's say you see someone sleeping rough and you buy them a cheese and pickle sandwich, or cheese and salad cream is my personal choice, and that's going to sustain them for the next few hours. Okay, and that's a good thing. As we move along, our impact, our contribution will last several years, if not generations. Think about ensuring a society has no people sleeping rough, or think about training teachers really well. Now what this creates is 4 archetypes. And these archetypes can be matched to your personality, your psychology, your values, your behaviours, your skills, and the time you have. We all fit at least one, but most of us fit 2, 3, or 4. The top left is represented by Chaz, humanitarian emergency. If you're the type of person that is amazing in a crisis, that can work in chaos, that wants to be with people in their greatest moment of need, and has resilience and resourcefulness to kind of work on the front line. It could be serving soup, handing out bottles of water, or you could be a doctor or nurse, like really on the front line. Like that's where the world needs you. They're going to need you now. For others, it'd be sustainable development like Malala. If you're the type of person that like thinks upstream, is very curious, wants to be part of creating the inventiveness, the innovations, the infrastructure that's going to create a better world for generations to come, like, that's where the world needs you. For others, it'll be a bit like Dorothy, what we call humanitarian foundations. This is like the engine that makes everything purr. Think about what makes the organisations you work for successful. It's having a great brand and beautiful website to communicate your message. It's having great governance and regulations and policies. It's having good onboarding. It's having good traces that are left behind, right? It's great leaders. Anything that is a specialised skill that will make an organisation more effective or institution, that's where you can serve. And there's millions of organisations around the world that would love you to contribute to their cause. Now, the final area is the leaping off point, okay? So the leaping off point is where we can all begin. Because some people hear these 3 areas and like, okay, that sounds good, but it's quite a jump for me. In this space, there's hundreds of things we can do immediately, every single day. And it's personified by my granddad, Harry Hanks. This is my granddad here. This is actually when he was in his 80s, laying the patio for my mum. This picture's from, in his vest. Amazing human being. He grew up in abject poverty in East London, like hard life. He worked on building sites, actually lost his hair falling from a great height, so we endearingly called him Baldy Grandad, which he loved. But he was a real man of community. What he cared about, what his purpose was including the excluded and returning love for hate. And when he passed in 2015, I found an article from this lady named Helen, and there was a lovely photo of Helen with my nan and granddad. And it was a testimony where she explained that she was really lost and broken. She'd had a difficult childhood and she was kind of without hope, but it was my granddad's kindness that turned her life around. So I try and find Helen, but I sadly can't. But I did hear back from London City Mission where he worked. And I hear from this great guy called Robert. He says, Benjamin, your granddad had a profound impact on my life. Like, I'd love to host you for the day. So we have a brilliant day and people told glowing stories about my granddad. And as we're leaving, we pass his desk, and there's a picture. Helen, my nan and Grandad, and Robert. I'm just like, how do you know Helen? He's like, well, she's my wife. How do you know Helen? And I explain the story, and he says, Benjamin, every week your Grandad was out of work with his little stand, and Helen would sit down and pour her heart out. And he did do one thing, and he didn't do another. The thing he did do was listen, and the thing he didn't do was judge her. That was enough to turn her life around. Robert said, but more than that, it was that he never gave up. He was there every week without fail. And even when she became well in herself again, he was still there supporting her, cheering on, as Helen and Robert did for others what he had done for her, which is the third step, which is don't give up. One act of kindness is a beautiful thing. But how we really change society, how we stop the depression, the suicide, the anxiety, it's compounding that kindness like time and time again. That's how we really build community. That's how we build a world where there's less suffering and more joy. You know, a little over a year ago, our first baby, beautiful Miriam, was born 2 months early. And it was an emergency C-section. And she was growth restricted, and she weighed a tiny 2.7 pounds, although there's babies born much earlier, much smaller than that. Obviously quite a daunting experience to go through. This is a neonatal intensive care unit where she spent her first 2 months. And it wasn't for her amazing mum and the incredible staff at the NHS, we would have lost her. So, you know, the NHS reminds us of what human beings can do to recalibrate a better world when we pull together, when we have community. The last years, the last 10 years, I felt a bit like poor Kev here, right? There's guns going off everywhere, it's total chaos. What if the next 10 years could feel like Miriam here? Right now, Miriam is happy and healthy now. Do you know why she's this happy? Because she just got handed a peg. And I think there's a mindful lesson there for us. That the world has felt too dark too often in recent times. And humankind goes through this, right? We have times of chaos, times of joy, and we're kind of in a rut. Imagine how different our world could feel if we built a national community service, where every single one of us had a purpose that we cared so much for that we gave our time to that cause and we didn't give up. I think that would be a real beautiful world and a great thing for us to do. The great Leo Tolstoy said that we only truly come alive in ourselves when we live for others. That's community. And I believe that's an idea that's always been worth spreading. Thanks for listening.